Tes. Tes. tes tes. Uli.
Keren banget. Keren banget.
Masuk. Coba itu ditutup.
Kemudian ada dari
Good morning, Harald.
Good morning, Joko.
Thank you. Oh, you're coming. I
Pleasure.
yeah. I also see Ibu Emma. I think yeah. Selamat siang, Bu Emma. And then Pak Febi ya, Pak Febi already.
Selamat siang Pak Joko.
Ya, Oh, Febi, terima kasih.
Febi Tumiwa, Pak.
Ya. Terima kasih. So, I would like to introduce you to Professor Harald Winkler. Yeah. Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Good morning, Professor Harald.
Good morning. Very good to meet you. Ah, there. Okay, good.
Okay.
Hi.
And also Pak Fabi. Saya nanti moderator Pak Fabi. Pradono.
Ya.
Ya, Pak.
Ya, selamat siang. Ibu Emma juga sudah.
Kita akan nunggu setelah pembicara yang lain ya, bicara ya. Hai Harald, how are you? Long time no see.
Hi. Yes, good. It has been a long time. Yeah. Very good. Very, very nice to be with you. Thanks, Joko, for the invitation.
Ibu Emma, I would like to introduce to Professor Harald. Just in case you will meet at the COP meeting. So
okay.
Ibu Emma always attend. COP.
Hello, Emma. Good. Yeah. Well, we won't have a COP this year, Emma, right? Maybe next year.
I think David also here. Good morning, David.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to the third Climate Policy and Finance Talk hosted by the Climate Change Center of Institut Teknologi Bandung, titled Strengthening the Indonesian Climate Governance in Energy Sector Towards Achieving the NDC Target. My name is Dimas Anindito and I would like to give you the role for this webinar. So the first one would be, please rename your account name with the format name_institution when joining the Zoom room. Participants are requested not to activate the microphone feature or turn on the mute mode during the webinar. During the webinar, participants can ask the panelists by using the Q&A box with the format name_institution followed by the questions. The questions from the participants will be read out after the questions from the discussion have been answered by the panelists. Moderators have the full rights to manage the webinar, and please fill the attendance form through the link. We will send the certificate and the materials no later than 2 weeks after the webinar by email. All participants who register and fill out the attendance form receive certificates. This webinar the registrants for this webinar is around 108 people, ranging from school students and then the academic institutions, and then from the government institution, NGOs, and also private sectors. So that would be all. Over to you, Pak Pradono.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this talk. I am Pradono from IDB. Will lead and moderate this session. Welcome to all of you. to the climate policy and finance talk number 3, and we'll come back for you those already come for the or came for the first and second numbers. Okay, this time the title will be strengthening the Indonesian climate governance in energy sector towards achieving the NDC targets. And as you may read that this is part of collaborative research project strengthening national climate policy implementation, comparative empirical learning, and creating linkage to climate finance or SNAP-V, part of international climate initiative and supported by the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, and Nuclear Safety. And this time we have honored with the name of respected 7 speakers, including Pak Joko as the head of the Climate Change Center of IDB. So I think within 2 hours, I will chair this session, and I'm sorry if I'm a little bit strict because of limited time. Yes, the aim of this talk actually is to disseminate the results of the findings for the year 1 of the projects, mainly from the Indonesian side. And we will have a response and also a comparative results from our counterpart from South Africa, represented by Professor Harad. So for this research, actually, the question is how do the issues of climate governance and implementing NDC in Indonesia get addressed by the current institutional setup. So the focus of this first year examine the institutional arrangement regarding climate change issues, particularly in energy governance in Indonesia, in order to propose the best suited international institutional configuration towards achieving the NDC. And for the first, and as an opening remark, I would like to invite Professor Joko Santoso as a director of the Climate Change Center of ITB to give his opening remarks. And as you may know that Professor Joko, beside the director, is also a senior lecturer and head of the Regional and Rural Planning Research Group within the School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, Institute of Technology, Bandung. He got his PhD in University of Queensland in the Geographical Science and Planning. Please welcome Professor Joko.
Thank you very much, Professor Pradono. Yeah, this is Fitria. I can be that screen. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I have actually 6 slides. I hope I can manage on time. Thank you, Professor Pradono. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everybody. Selamat sore for the participant in Indonesia. Good morning to Professor Harad Winkler and David in Berlin. Alhamdulillah, thanks to God, we can organize what you call Climate Policy and Finance Talk Serie-3 today. For the Serie-1, at the time we talk about green stimulus recovery package after COVID, and then the second we discuss about adaptation, and now the third one we talk about energy governance. First of all, I would like to thanks for all distinguished participants who come from wide variety of background and location. And then I also would like to thanks Professor Harald Winkler, Ibu Emma Rahmawati, Director of Mitigation of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Dr. Haryanto, Director of Energy Conservation of the Ministry of Energy, and then Professor Haryadi as discussion. Unfortunately, today Professor Haryadi cannot join directly because he is still at the Central Kalimantan due to urgent tasks in relation to the food estate of Indonesia. And then I would like to thank Pak Febi Tumiwa, Profesor Pradono, Dr. Niken, Pak Fitrianto, Dr. Budi, Dimas, Fitri, and Sita. So in this opening remark, I would like to provide context as well as purpose of this webinar. For the purpose, basically to get feedback of our first year study, as mentioned by Professor Pradono, that our consortium research now is entering the second year. So this time we try to disseminate and would like to have feedback of the result of our first year study, which will be in detail explained later by Dr. Niken. And then the second purpose is basically to identify focus for the second year study. For the context, we are very lucky to organize as of today, 16th of October 2020, because we then have both opportunity to consider new global and national context. What I mean by new global context is that few days ago, 13th of October, IEA, International Energy Agency, just launched what's so-called World Economic Outlook 2020, which is very important for our continuing research year 2 and so on. And then also for the national context, we also have what's so-called a new law just passed by Parliament, what's so-called as omnibus law. This is also would influence the continuation of our research. So as we can see in the screen, and already mentioned by Professor Pradono, this research is collaboration between German, Indonesia, India, South Africa, and Brazil. Today we invite Professor Harald to have a perspective from the study of South Africa, which is quite close with our problem in dealing with the transition of coal as main energy resources. Basically, this consortium consists of, from 2019 to 2023. So as I said, this is the second year. And basically, the aim is to support the NDC implementation. And then on the right screen, basically this study consists of two, country study and cross-country study. For the country study, we choose to study the NDC government in energy sector, which we try to divide the output into short-term and long-term. The short-term one, we try to produce a kind of policy advice to the relevant ministries like Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Energy, Bappenas, and so on. And then for the long term, we try to formulate a model of NDC government. For the cross-country study, we analyzed two financial schemes, Green Sukuk and RADD. The goal is to find an innovative international climate finance scheme. Next. This is from the Energy Outlook to 2020, published by International Energy Agency a few days ago. This is to show that the global demand of energy experience decrease. They made three scenarios. The yellow one is based on the World Energy Outlook 2019 last year, and then the blue one is STEP. This is based on the what stated policy in every country, and then the red one is a delayed recovery scenario. So for the yellow one, with the assumption the global economic growth will be 3.6, and then for the STEP scenario, due to the COVID, the growth of economic will be 3%, and the assumption is that next year, 2021, the COVID can be controlled and the economic will recover slowly. For the DRS, the late recovery scenario, if the COVID only can be controlled by 2023. So this is very much influence the decrease of energy demand. And then in the left side below, based on the modeling, the IEA find that in the recovery, renewable energy will take a lead, and coal, on the other hand, will never get back to the pre-crisis level. So very, very relevant to Indonesia is the question of what are the implications of the decreasing demand for coal energy policies in Indonesia, and then will the use of coal on a domestic scale increase as consequence of production and the greener technology on coal, and then will this condition actually become a pathway to encourage new and renewable energy. So I think the coming year, we will see how our government respond this trend of decreasing demand of coal. Next. So this is basically the left screen to show that based on the STEP scenario, the global emission will show around between 30 gigaton, and then with the pledge from EU, UK, New Zealand, and so on, which stated that they will apply green recovery, so will reduce the blue part of the emission, and then China just now announced that they will target the carbon neutral by 2060. So there are still a gap with the color of gray. So basically, to achieve the carbon neutrality, we should really working together between companies, citizens, and also finance institution, which led by the government. So this is very important one. And then the right side to show that if we use only the existing infrastructure alone, could lead to still rise of temperature by 1.65 Celsius degree. So yeah, this is to show the the global trend, then in Indonesia we should respond to this global trend. Next. Yeah, 2 minutes left my time. So this is I would like to review the policy framework on energy in Indonesia from the law and then government regulation, and then also the presidential decree number 22/2017. From the government regulation 79/2014, we can see that based on this scenario, by 2050 we still use around 32% of coal. And then basically National Energy Plan saying that the coal production must be limited maximum of 400 million ton. But just now, government issued a new law which could change this limit. And we can see on the right side that basically in 2019, coal production reaching 610 million ton. So 24.74% higher from the production target, and so on. So the question still remains, to what extent has Indonesia policies setting accommodate the need of fulfilling domestic energy demand, achieve NDC, and work toward energy sovereignty. So what we mean by energy sovereignty here is because Indonesia has quite plenty of energy resources. So in fulfilling the demand of energy, we should maximize the domestic resources. That is the energy sovereignty concept taken from the law number 30/2007. Next. So this I want to show in brief 3 other countries study, as I mentioned before, that basically in our consortium there are 2 types of study, country study and cross country. And for the country study, later Professor Halat will explain more detail, but we have similarity with South Africa in that we both try to move actually from coal to new and renewable. But what to me is look different is that South Africa clearly state that they will phase out from the coal. That is the main difference. And then for the India, focus on steel industry, because the industry was based on fossil fuel combustion. And then Brazil focus on railway. Next. Click. Yeah, this is basically reflecting from Indonesia context, where coal transitions a long way due to political challenge, perception of coal as cheap energy source to power the country, financial constraint, etc. So the question is how government of South Africa managed the coal phase out in the midst of political economy. So it looks we have quite different in terms of the political economy. This will be explained by Professor Hela. Next. So this is basically I show you in terms of the purpose, second purpose of this webinar. We try to identify certain focus for the year 2 and so on. So as I mentioned before, that basically it will be influenced by COVID, and then nationally we should also consider the omnibus law, and then from the reflection to other to other countries like South Africa, Brazil, and India. The context is how to manage the energy development in the midst of political economic aspect. So we have 4 question, detailed question for the second year. I think I do need to read one by one, but yeah, this is okay. Thank you, Prof. Pradono.
Okay. Thanks, Professor Joko, for opening remarks. And for the next less than 2 hours, we will have 4 speakers, 2 discussions, and also question and answer time. So I will allocate for 1 hour for 4 speakers, 15 minutes for discussion, and about 30 minutes for question and answer. The next 4 speakers will be respectively first Dr. Niken Prilandita from IDB, second Professor Harald Winkler from South Africa, third Ibu Emma Rahmawati from Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and the fourth is Dr. Haryanto from Indonesian Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. So I would like to invite first speaker, Dr. Niken Prilandita from IDB, to deliver your speech. And Dr. Niken Prilandita is lecturer and researcher from the Urban Planning and Design Research Group within the School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development of IDB. Please welcome Dr. Niken.
Yes, thank you, Professor Pradono, and good afternoon, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, and also good morning to our colleagues from South Africa and Germany. Can the organizer probably show the presentation? Yeah, thank you.
15 minutes for you, Dr. Niken.
Yes, thank you. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Continuing from what Professor Joko has present, allow me as the member of the SNAPV research team to convey to you the detailed result of our first year study on the Indonesia climate governance in energy sector. The next slide show this presentation basically divided into 6 parts. And so first, let me begin from the breakdown of the Indonesia NDC target by sector. As you probably know that Indonesia's NDC target is 26% without assistance and 41% if we could get the international assistance. Here in the chart is shown that the biggest greenhouse gases emission in Indonesia comes from the land use change and forestry, especially caused by the deforestation and pit fire. Whereas the energy sector is the second largest. However, it is projected to have the biggest annual growth until 2030. So there are many intertwining issues between climate change management and energy sector, and many policies promulgated to tackle these issues by sector, and yet not many have studied it comprehensively. And therefore, this study, we would like to delve deeper to understand the political economy aspect of NDC in energy sector in Indonesia, and to find out who and what to do in operationalizing the NDC target. And the next slide, you can find the table that I told you earlier about the energy sector. According to the business as usual scenario, is going to have a significant increase of greenhouse gases emission compared with other sector. And next, so from those facts, the research question arise from this study. is how do the issues of climate governance in implementing the NDC in Indonesia get addressed by the current institutional setup. And there are several objectives we identify. First is to identify what is lacking and preeminent before and after the dissolvement of the National Commission of Climate Change, and identify the mechanism that tailored every issue regarding climate change under the previous and the current institutional setup, and investigate how the institutions tackle those challenges down. And we have conducted several interviews before and after the COVID era. The first phase held in December last year in the form of a national workshop, and I also saw several of the participants here attended that workshop last year. And the second interview was held between January and May. And the interviews were chosen using snowball sampling. The total of the interviewees we contacted is around 19 respondents. And there are also several analyses we have performed, the stakeholder analysis and the policy analysis, which I will explain the result later on. Okay, moving to the next slide. This is the respondents or the key informants that we have interviewed. As you can see, most of them are government officials and others are academicians, also experts. We also interviewed banks, embassy, and also journalists. Aside from the interviews, we also have reviewed some literature where we start from two major concepts, namely the environmental governance and the concept of climate governance, which emerged later on as the subset of environmental governance. In the climate governance arena, here stated that actors involved are various, started from the state actors, subnational governments, multilateral institutions, NGOs, business interests, and scientists. And therefore, we try to approach those key actors in order to understand the climate governance in Indonesian energy sector. Next, also still based on the literature, we found that there are several issues often faced in the climate governance, generally in each country. I'm not going to explain one by one, but basically we have classified these issues into three major classifications, which are the difference in priority from each sectoral viewpoints. And the second one is the complexity and uncertainty of the climate change issues and aspect itself. And then the entrepreneur traits, such as the involvement of private sector, is still also highly quite an issue in every country. And next, in order to understand the climate governance in Indonesia, we tried to do a historical review of Indonesia's climate governance. We start from 1992 because internationally it was when the UNFCCC was established, and it creates an effect onto Indonesia policy in climate change, especially when 2 years later in 1994, the government eventually admit the role of UNFCCC through the law of number 6, 1994. Unfortunately, during this period, there was no significant milestones achieved in terms of climate change. Up until the period of 2007, 2008, there were several events occurred, both in climate change management and also in energy sector. For example, the establishment of the National Energy Board in 2007. And then there's also the summit, the Bali Action Plan in 2007, which eventually pushed the establishment of the DNPI, or and National Commission for Climate Change, by the president in 2008. Next, in 2009, actually there's a quite big milestone here where the president declared Indonesia commitments to reduce greenhouse gases emission in the G20 Leaders Summit. This is actually the first time that we stated this the NDC target. And during 2009 until 2013, there are several efforts in tackling deforestation, such as the establishment of the REDD plus uh, agency, and also the signing of the memorandum of understanding with the government of Norway. And then there are several policies in tackling the deforestation. And in 2014, there's a change in the presidentship, and there are several key milestone also happen when there's the integration of the NPI and the REDD into the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And then also in 2015, the Indonesia also first submit the NDC target to the UNFCCC. And after that, next, yeah, there's the Paris Agreement ratification, and also there are several policies promulgated in order to support NDC, including the ministerial decree regarding the national registry system, and also for monitoring and evaluation. And recently in 2019, last year, the establishment of the Environmental Funding Management Agency, or BPDLH, in order to support the financing for the climate change. So these are the milestones that happen in terms of climate governance and also energy sector in Indonesia. And this is a more detailed process of the Indonesia first NDC submission to the UNFCCC, starting from 2016 until it is regulated and ratified by the presidential regulation, and so on. I think we can skip this part and move on to focus more on the energy sector. So this is just a brief profile of the Indonesian energy sector. Especially here we can see that the largest energy came from steam power plants, followed by the steam oil power plants, which means that it's still dominated by the coal-based power plants. And for the renewable energy itself, in 2018, it's still less than 5%, so still small compared to the others. And in the next chart, we can see for the detailed proportion of the renewable energy in the next slide, that the largest part is dominated by hydropower, and then geothermal. And yeah, next, please. Okay, this is to show the the energy consumption in Indonesia, the biggest is from transportation sector, followed by industry, household, and commercial. Okay, move on to the next slide. Yeah, I think we can skip this also. Okay, so in energy sector, we found there are several issues faced by the government of Indonesia. We classified that into three major issues. First is the coal dilemma, whereas Indonesia is one of the biggest coal producer in the world, and so it's cheaper to produce and buy the coal-based electricity. And the PLN, or the state electricity company, is the only company owned by the state that regulate and produce and also buy the electricity in Indonesia, and also it has a limitation in terms of budget. From the policy framework in supporting the renewable energy investment, the pricing policy is still not too attractive enough, and also the licensing process is perceived to be complicated, and the government of Indonesia still perceive that the renewable energy is only for those that are in remote and off-grid areas. In terms of transparency and coordination, we found out that there are still the perception that programs from international donors do not match with the government in Indonesia program, and also there's a lack of monitoring and evaluation, and also the measurement for the greenhouse gas emission is still not clear yet. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Yeah. Okay, we have performed a stakeholder analysis in order to understand and to know which are the primary actors in the climate change management and also in energy sector in Indonesia. We found out that the Ministry of Environmental and Forestry and Bappenas are the primary actors of climate change management. And in the energy sector, we found out also that the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources is the important actor. And the DEN, or the DEN, or the National Energy Board, also becomes central in overseeing the coordination between ministries in the implementing NDC in the energy sector. And also not forget to mention the PLN, or the State Electricity Company, with the coordination with the Directorate of Electricity in the Ministry of Energy. And while the Indonesian NDC implementation revolves around the top-down governments, there are other stakeholders and initiatives involved, such as the NGOs and also journalists and academicians. And how does the NDC target is operationalized at the political level? We found out that the relevant ministries may have not been fully aware on the function of climate change as a system, and so therefore they move on with their sectoral point of view, and it's not well integrated as a whole system. And during the consensus building for the NDC target, there are often several conflicts and causing the consensus result and implementation to be ineffective. For example, we found out that the emission reduction target was not sufficiently consulted with the Directorate General of New and Renewable Energy, for example. And oftentimes, the Ministry of Energy and the then authority has not discussed with the members of NEC in the meetings, and the media or journalists, they constantly reports the progress on the commitment of Indonesia to the international target, but often the internal policy draft and the final documents are oftentimes lacking. And so for the policy analysis, because I'm running out of time, I'm going to be quick. We found out that there's a gap between the Indonesian pledge to the NDC with the national policy and programs to achieve it, where the renewable energy development is still not preferable rather than the coal-based energy development. And this is quite worrisome because some of the informants said if this kind of policy making is still going on, we might not cut up the pace with the target. As a conclusion, in the energy sector, Indonesia still facing major challenges such as coal dilemma, and then the raising of bridging fuel from natural gas and green technology of coal use. And then we need for the renewable energy development, it requires strong legal framework to attract foreign investment. And in terms of energy policy dimensions, there's also a dilemma in choosing between fulfilling the domestic energy demand, emission reduction, and working towards energy sovereignty. And also there is a vertical and horizontal complexities in the Indonesian climate change and energy governance, along with the sectoral complexity itself. And yeah, next, we listed also several further research questions which might trigger our discussion for later, but maybe because yeah, my time is up, so we can probably discuss on later on. So this is our presentation. Thank you very much. I turn over to Professor Pradono. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Regan. She has already given overview and background of the Indonesian reports and the study for the first year. Take the chronology of the milestone in the Indonesian climate governance, some issues, as well the interesting of aspect of institutional aspects that she gives some notes in the conclusion that we may discuss further later in the question and time. And next, we would like to invite for the next 15 minutes Professor Harold Winkler from the University of Cape Town, South Africa, to present your slides. And Professor Harold is the Director of Energy Research Centers, University of Cape Town. He co-directs the program mitigation action plans and scenarios during 2010 and 2015. And also his research interests are energy, climate change, and sustainable development. Professor Harold got his PhD in 2006 in Energy and Development Studies from the University of Cape Town. Please welcome Professor Harold.
Thank you so much, Professor Pradono, and thank you, Professor Joko, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here and very exciting to share some perspectives from South Africa and to learn from you in Indonesia. Also good to see some colleagues like Emma and Fabi, who I've met in other contexts. But if you could share my slides, or yeah, thank you very much. I see the screen sharing is starting. So I'm going to be talking to you about a case study that we've done for the same SNAP-fee project. It's already been explained, which is focused on a just transition transaction in South Africa, which is an innovative way to finance the accelerated phase out of coal. And Professor Joko, the political economy part, there are no easy answers, but funding the transition for affected communities and workers is important. Next slide, please. I think we've shown this. This is the consortium. Thank you very much. This has already been said. Next slide, please. So the case study for those attendees interested, there's a research report, and we now, and I want to acknowledge my co-authors, Samantha Keane and Andrew Marquardt from the UCT team. We've also put this in it's got a lengthy research paper, but we also have a shorter policy brief, which you can find there, and these slides can be shared afterwards. Next slide, please. So what does a just transition, before we go to the transaction, which is the finance part, what does a just transaction mean? And so for us in South Africa, not dissimilar it mean to Indonesia in the energy part, in South Africa it means going from historically high emissions and quite exclusive development to low emissions and inclusive development. So a transition to lower emissions, and particularly in our electricity sector. So this is, energy is of course broader, but we have a very coal-dominated energy sector. Over 70% of our total primary energy supply and over 90% of our electricity comes from coal. And just means, to use the language in the Sustainable Development Goals, meaning leaving no one behind. And what exactly that means is the question of political economy, which Professor Joko so rightly raises. The transaction, so the focus of our case study, which is narrower than the just transition, is for us a big discussion. It is the discussion about development and climate change in South Africa at the moment, and I think for the next several years. But the transaction is a narrower focus. And just in brief, and I will expand on this in detail in the following slides, it mobilizes blended finance to fund two things: the accelerated phase out of coal and the protection of livelihoods of those communities and workers who are affected. And so what's very important in relation to political economy is in any transition, there are winners and losers, and those who lose out, particularly the most vulnerable and poor communities and workers who are working not just in the coal-fired power stations, but in the whole coal value chain. Not addressing that would mean that it wouldn't be politically viable to have such a transition in South Africa. Next slide, please. So just in case there's any misperception that we don't have political challenges in South Africa because this transaction is being developed, we do. It's very, it's different, similar but different to Indonesia. But so here we're showing an image from the case study. Our national electricity utility is called Eskom and faces major challenges, internally, operational, structural, and financial. It's externally, there's a climate change challenge, which means that we should not be building new coal, although our official electricity plan includes both the decommissioning of coal-fired plant and building of some new coal, which is very hard to understand for an academic, but it is the case. And we are seeing increasingly competitive renewable energy technologies, particularly wind and solar PV, significantly now grid connected. For us, it also started mainly as an off-grid program, but now we are seeing relative to the size of our grid, quite large scale uptake. But there are many challenges. We have an outdated electricity sector in terms of its structure. It's a vertically integrated monopoly. And there's a big discussion around unbundling Eskom, our national utility, and allowing more competition from independent power producers. Most of the renewable energy is being developed by independent power producers, and the imperatives of development and justice, and how do we get away from the structural dependency on coal that we've had. It has been our South Africa's, yeah, thank you. The big elephant in the room for us is sorry, I'm using South African Rand here, 488 billion Rand problem of Eskom debt. To give you a sense, in euros, about 26 billion euros and counting. This is, most of this is in generation, old coal-fired power plants, not so much in transmission and distribution. And it's at a level where our national utility is unable to service the debt. And is rated at junk status, is unable to access capital markets anymore. There is debt in other state-owned companies as well, but Eskom's is by far the biggest, and the Minister of Finance has been clear. This is a public statement. This threatens South Africa's entire fiscal framework. At the same time, we're seeing big pressures internationally to disinvest from coal power globally because of the challenge of climate change. And so, to be clear, the Just Transition Transaction funds the additional phase out of coal. It does not fund the legacy debt in the coal-fired power plants. Next slide, please. So how is this, what is the financial architecture that is being, and just to be clear, this transaction has not been implemented yet. It's being developed and explored and increasingly advocated for, even at the level of the presidency of South Africa. But the financial architecture that a group called Meridian Economics has developed is shown here. So there, in the middle of the diagram, you see a blended finance vehicle, and it's blended in two ways. It's a blend of commercial and concessionary funds and international and domestic finance. So very important, international climate finance. The scale of the transaction that is being aimed at is $11 billion US dollars, of which about 4 billion would be international climate finance provided probably through development finance institutions, and 7 billion, a larger part, of domestic commercial funders, which would be the senior tranche, and the subordinated concessionary tranche would be put into a blended finance vehicle. That is important because that money can go to a blended finance vehicle. It can, at the moment, not go to Eskom directly because it does not have access to the capital markets. That is then lent on by this blended finance vehicle to Eskom at a slightly different rate. And the difference between those rates, so the concessionary rate and what it's lent out at, is very important, because that value accrues in the blended finance vehicle, and that money, that's that gray arrow at the bottom marked catalytic grant finance, that flows into a South African Just Transition Fund, and that would fund the Just Transition, meaning development projects that would give livelihoods to create new livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods for workers that have lost their jobs due to the transition, say in a coal-fired power station or in a coal mine or downstream activities. As well as, yeah, and so that is very important, again, to the political economy issues. Next slide, please. What do we mean by accelerated phase out of coal? Faster than what? So our official electricity plan is called the IRP. Apologies for the acronym, the Integrated Resource Plan. And we've done some national modeling. Here, the decommissioning of existing coal plan in a UCT energy model, which will be faster than the IRP. So as I said, our electricity plan foresees some decommissioning of coal, but in order for this transaction to work and for it to be climate finance, we'd say even faster, move away from coal. Next slide, please. And I've already started talking to this, the Just Transition Fund, or explain in terms of the financial architecture, where that the source of funding for the Just Transition Fund is very important. It's not only in the significant scale that by having a percentage of large financial flows, you get a significant scale of money, but it's also a predictable source of finance, rather than depending on some donor or grant maker or treasury, for that matter, making a decision to put money into the Just Transition Fund as a percentage of a transaction. It's a predictable source of funding, and it's really important that it supports communities and workers that would be the losers, potential losers of in a transition to away from coal. I think I've covered everything on this slide. Very important in South Africa is social justice for the most vulnerable. Thank you. No, the next slide, that's what's good. So this is a concrete example of funding the socioeconomic transition costs. And while a lot of the SNAP fee project is focused on finance and international climate finance, very much what we are finding that finance is absolutely necessary, but it's not a sufficient condition. It needs to work with other enablers, policy, institutional, cultural drivers of change, or to paraphrase what somebody said in Bill Clinton's presidential election campaign, it's not the economy stupid, it's the political economy stupid. Both the economy and the political economy are really very important. Next slide, please. And what we are finding from this case study is that there is a lot of focus on, as I've already mentioned, on disinvestment in coal. And there's a lot of literature around green finance. Increasingly in South Africa and globally, renewable energy technologies like wind and solar are commercially competitive. They don't actually need subsidies anymore, and a lot of focus on green finance. But we need finance of the transition itself. And what we mean by that are things like repurposing of coal-fired power plants, and as I've emphasized, addressing the socioeconomic implications, particularly for affected communities and workers. Next slide, please. Oh, that's just saying the scale of that I've already mentioned of 4 billion from DFIs. Next slide, please. So our case study is suggesting that there can be a somewhat different meaning of climate finance. The traditional focus has been on the green finance in the previous slide, that top right corner. But the Just Transition Transaction, the JTT for short, focuses on funding the accelerated phase out of coal. We see that as catalytic. By having less coal, it creates more space for green technologies. And it also enables greater financial sustainability. So while it does not fund Eskom and does not fund the legacy debt of Eskom, by having access to capital markets, again, it does help with Eskom financial sustainability, Eskom, again, being our national utility. So we are saying that we need to rethink climate finance to include this important and neglected category, transition finance. And Professor Joko, and having listened to you and your team about green sukuk, it's interesting. There are other ideas, and then I'm presenting how we are thinking about it, and really looking forward to also learning more from you. Next slide. So some of the lessons and implications, the Just Transition is a large $11 billion in total, and we think innovative use of international climate to achieve certainly climate, but also development objectives. In the context of the Paris Agreement, that has also been mentioned importantly in the webinar today, there is Article 21C, which sometimes gets less attention than Article 21A about the temperature goals, but making financial flows consistent with low emissions and indeed climate resilient development at the national level is something we're also continuing to think about in year 2 of this SNAP fee project. We are focused, the Just Transition Transaction is focused on mitigation, but as previous speakers have mentioned, adaptation is also important. And what we are saying, if there were more Just Transition transactions across the world, we would have more global mitigation, and that would reduce the need for adaptation. That's a reminder that I'm running out of time. I think I have one or two more slides. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I think this is my last substantive slide. Perhaps this is an idea whose time has come. Post-COVID, certainly debt, I think across the world will be increasing, and many developing countries, most emerging economies will not have fiscal space, so they will need debt relief. And so the Just Transition Transaction, I think, is also very relevant to this post-COVID context. Next slide, please, just to check. Yes, I'm done. Thank you very much. And back to you, Professor Prodona.
Yep, thank you, Professor Harald. Very interesting presentation. dealing with just transition. Yeah? In the case of South Africa and its possibility for implementation for the post-COVID-19 in the climate finance. Yeah. Okay, we may discuss further later in the question and answer time. Next, we would like to invite Ibu Emma Ramawati.
Yes, Pak Kadono, my apology. Ibu Emma cannot be present right now. So instead of her, my apologies. So I've tried to
Okay.
to deliver her message. I'm so sorry. I was running out of the meeting room. Halo, selamat siang.
For 15 minutes, please present your slide.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Bapak Ibu narasumber, ada Pak Haryanto di sini. Good afternoon, Professor Harald. So you are here present as an expert, yes, not a negotiator. Hopefully next year. Okay. Maybe can I have the the slide is really short. Actually, we only prepare 4 slides just to respond Professor Joko's concern about this study. So next slide, please. So this is the first slide, just to describe our process during the development of NDC, as well as our current condition relating to the other mandates of the Paris Agreement related to updated NDC, as well as to the LTS, long-term strategy in 2050. So as mandated by the PA, so we already submitted our first NDC, which already mentioned by previous speakers, that we have been committed to reduce emission by 2090 up to 41% compared to business as usual. So during that process, we've been developing the tools, as well as the regulation, and other supporting enable condition to implement the NDC in national level. So we have the roadmap NDC. So we have 2 roadmaps, roadmap on adaptation, as well as roadmap and mitigation, of course. And in 2019, this roadmap, based on the target on NDC, we elaborated certain activities, how we can achieve the NDC target by 2030. And we have also biannual target, how far the reduction will go through that 2 biennial years up until 2030. So this is our roadmap on NDC mitigation and NDC adaptation as well. So I think NDC adaptation and the roadmap of NDC adaptation element has been finalized this year. And it risks also the security of in energy. We also prepare the document on updated NDC. Actually, due to the COVID-19, it was delayed. Just like COP26 delay 1 year ahead. Then, so I think the updated and the LTS will be our planning will be submitted this year as mandated by the PA. And in 2020, we also have developed the regulation as well as other supporting tools. So we developed the BLHD, the financial institution, which will organize or which will manage the climate fund in Indonesia. I think moment. Maaf Pak, belum.
Back to previous slide.
Sorry. Or should I move quickly? Yes. Okay. So, so in 2021, I think we now in 2020 we are developing the board, the third board biennial update report, and we plan to submit it in 2021. And during that process, we also will elaborate the role of non-party stakeholders in national level, including how the private sectors and community and other related institutions will have really crucial role in implementation on NDC. Next, please. This is the strategy for the coordination, the national coordination. So we have already established the ScienceSmart, the inventory system, the national inventory system, as well as the MRV system through the national register system on climate change. And we also have to fulfill our mandate regarding the national communication and BUR, as I mentioned before. And for the national coordination as well as the subnational coordination, if we're talking about the NPS, we also include the process in the high-level dialogue. So the aim is to have the commitment from the high level by the related or technical ministries based on the sector. So, like for example, for the energy, we have been then include the dialogue, the high-level dialogue with the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. And Pak Haryanto will be our next speaker, isn't he? And in the technical level coordination, so we also have the capacity building effort as well as the close coordination in terms of, for example, in terms of the modeling or scenarios, how to develop the baseline, and et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. This is our response to the country study. So similar to the other 4 sectors, the energy sectors, the target in NDC, the number of the target in NDC, 11%, is already coordinated and consulted, as well as we are on that time we were running the modeling and scenario to have the scenario of CM1 and CM2 with the Ministry of Environment and Mineral Resources, as well as we also include the Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Industry, and Ministry of Public Works regarding the Ministry of Public Works regarding the building, the efficiency, the energy efficiency in building. And the next slide, please. This is the last slide. So only 3 bullets actually for our view on the country studies. So it will be then beneficial for us if the next step, Professor Joko, will be then pursue also how to linkage on scientific approach on the study to decision making process. So maybe from your, the science basis will have a kind of force to lead the decision maker to have on the right track of the implementation of NDC, because like previous speaker mentioned before, Ibu Niken mentioned that there is a hindrance for the NDC implementation, especially in renewable energy, on maybe in the other area as well. And we hope that this country study will give us a kind of view how on recommendation on how to strengthen the implementation due to that challenges. So maybe that, Pak Joko, what we are expecting to have in this country study. And the study we expect to also address the challenges post COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, actually, our Directorate General has already been starting how to measure the impact of the COVID-19 to the energy consumption as well as to the achievement of the NDC target in this year. So we have actually, based on the data, the energy consumption and the other, the first trimester. So we already have a kind of pictures that there are some delays on some areas of activities on the energy sector which have been impacted due to this COVID-19. So maybe that one, Professor Joko and Tim. I think this is the last slide, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you. Maybe during our discussion we will elaborate further. So how this country study will give us some inputs in this implementation. Thank you, and look forward to have a really fruitful discussion during this session. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ibu Julia, for especially the notes, response as well, suggestion for the study. Next, we will have the fourth speakers, Dr. Haryanto. He is the Director of Energy Conservation within the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. He obtained his doctoral degree in chemical engineering under the University of Indonesia and TU Technische University, Munich, Germany. Please welcome Dr. Haryanto for next 15 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Radono. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank to CCC ITB to invite us during today's discussion. And Honorable Professor Joko Santoso and Professor Harald from South Africa. Here also join with us Ibu Julia and also Pak Fabi, our colleagues, and Professor Haryadi. Of course, we are excited because the energy sector in which we are working was appointed as the team today to get input, as well as perhaps we would like to sharing some information related to the result of this study. First, I would like to congratulate the Climate Change Center team for completing this report. I think this first year report presents the scoping of the climate governance, energy governance, and also climate funding. In this my presentation, first I would like to share the insight on progress of the Indonesia NDC from energy sector. Next, please. So as mentioned, a previous speaker, that we have the target in emission, greenhouse gas emission through the Paris Agreement is about 29% in 2030. And from the energy sector, we should contribute around 11% to reducing greenhouse gas emission in 2025. Next, please. And this is just share with you all that this is the roadmap of NDC sector until 2030. That in 2030, the energy sector should contribute 340 million ton CO2 equivalent. So I think it is an ambitious target that we should achieve in 2030. Next, please. And I would like to share also here the achievement until 2020 or until this year. The achievement of the reducing emission that you can see here that in 2019 and 2020 we could achieve the target for the emission reduction in energy sector. So we hope that in the next year we could also achieve the target until 2030 as mandated in Paris Agreement. Next, please. And this is the mitigation action from energy sector that consists of energy efficiency here and also renewable energy that highest contribution in energy sector in terms of emission reduction. And then also implementation of low carbon fuel because we, as mentioned from the previous speaker, that we have the huge potential in coal fuel. Then this could be important if we could implement the low carbon fuel to switching the coal, like kerosene to LPG, natural gas for transportation, natural gas for household, and also implementation of high efficient fuel in transportation. And also using the clean generation technology like cogeneration technology and post-mining reclamation. Next, please. So, yes, next, yes. The strategy done to respond to other related ministry regarding to NDC. I have this document for the 9 program of NDC implementation. I just want to show that to respond the related ministry regarding to NDC, that is quite integrated approach in order to achieve the NDC. And then every stakeholder have task and responsibility in order to achieve this target. So we could also discussing about what the handicap actually in terms of climate governance or especially in energy government in terms of climate change in how to achieve the emission reduction. Next, please. So the strategy done to respond to other related ministry regarding to NDC, it is necessary to involve the Ministry of Home Affairs that in your first year report, I think would be better if we put also that necessary to inform the Ministry of Home Affairs to prepare the regional what is called APBD related to the emission reduction program, regional budget. And for the energy sector, MEMR has synergized with related ministers and institutions as well as non-parties. For example, in energy transportation with Ministry of Transportation, in terms of building energy with Ministry of PUPR, and for industrial energy with the Ministry of Industry. This is because from my point of view, the activities of greenhouse gas emission dominated by how to develop the renewable energy and how to implement the energy efficiency. And regarding the regional program, it is also necessary to synergize RAD, GRK, and also RUET from then. I think it is would be important in the next future. Next, please. And what's our comment in country study of Indonesia team years? As I understood that this is scoping related to the climate government, and it is consists of the primary stakeholders in Indonesian NDC governance. And second is how to achieve the NDC target. Third is policy and roadmap. And D or fourth is mechanism to ensure transparency. And last is about the investment or funding. Next, please. So input for year one, this is related to the primary stakeholder in Indonesia NDC government, that several government or agency, ministry or institution carry out their function according to the mandate of the applicable regulation. The most important thing is how the real program can be worked on together, namely how to reduce greenhouse gas emission, whether it is in the framework of NDC or beyond NDC, low carbon development, or etc. I think this is the important thing. And we are from Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources also preparing the carbon pricing trial to follow up the what they call rare purpose of carbon pricing, which is being processed as a manifestation of MEMR commitment. So this is to answer the commitment that you written in your report, that our top-down commitment in terms of climate change. Next, please. So how to achieve the NDC target? I think this is the reference or regulation. First is RUEN. That's this talk about the mixed renewable energy target. And inside, including also inside this RUPTL and also another document. And then RUET, next is about the energy efficiency target, 70% in 2025. This is including the reporting or data. This is called Pelaporan Online Management Energy and also Minimum Energy Performance Standard Regulation. Next, please. And it is according to the data that you put in your report that I just want to compare that it is the official data that we have that in Green One until 2030 in terms of roadmap of renewable energy. So I think it is a bit different or between this data. Thank you. Next, please. And this is also the data as just verify the data that you put in your report that until 2019, we already achieved around 10.3 gigawatt in renewable energy. I think it is around 14% in electricity renewable energy target. Next, please. And as mentioned by Ibu Yulia, that we already also developed our roadmap in energy sector in terms of NDC and energy sector, that we also compile the roadmap involving relevant stakeholders. And you can see here that it is the newest roadmap that we compose with also Ministry of Environment and also Forestry. Next, please. And in terms of investment, our comment is, I think it is management of grant funds related to the environment originating from international donors still use approach, including split across several ministry and institutions. And there is no sustainability of fund due to the nature of the funds, which are more of the demo project. And lack is improvement of control of the result of donor funding. Next. And regarding to the funding, I think this is good news that the Ministry of Finance also formed the PDLH that we hope in the next future they also will give the more funding in renewable energy as well as energy efficiency that we already discussed, that two things or that contribute highest in NDC energy sector actually. Next, please. And the last as input for years 2, I think climate governance, energy governance, and climate finance. I think we should also emphasize on climate finance will play an important role in achieving greenhouse gas emission reduction. And the balancing of the energy provision to satisfy the national demand, emission reduction for the sake of climate change, and optimum utilization of Indonesian domestic resources. And probably also focus on NDC or parallel also with beyond NDC. I think this is the hot issue now. If we should just focus in NDC, also we could parallel also talking about beyond NDC. And next is energy efficiency must go hand in hand with renewable energy in meeting rational national energy and meeting greenhouse gas emission reduction target. I think would be interesting if in your second study also including this. And next is the impact of the COVID-19 on NDC target. I think the calculation start when it will recover. I think nobody know that when we could start to recover our economy or our pandemic COVID-19. So I think it is very important if we adjust the target or whatever, and in terms of NDC target in 2030 or 2050. I think it is all that I could share with you all. Thank you for the opportunity. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, Pak Haryanto. Sorry, I'm taking over the task of moderator because in Professor Pradono house is experiencing the electricity blackout off. So thank you. I think very comprehensive and provide also, apart from the progress of NDC and energy sector, also respond to our year 1 and then also for the year 2. I mean, recommendation for the year 2. Thank you, Pak Haryanto. I think almost everybody mentioned about the need to taking account of COVID-19. Yeah. So it is very, very valid, I think. As I mentioned in my presentation, with energy outlook actually published that by now energy-related CO2 emission reduced by 7%, and energy investment also reduced by 18%. For oil, will soon recover. There are two scenarios. If COVID can be managed by 2021, and the worst case is if the COVID can only be managed by 2023. So now I would like to ask Pak Feby first, yeah. After Pak Feby, the written comment by Professor Haryadi will be delivered by Mas Dimas Anindito. So please, Pak Feby.
Thank you, Professor Joko, and allow me to share my presentation.
Please.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, my pleasure to speak in this important meetings, and also I see face that I know. Harald, it's long-term. I think we know each other a long time ago, since the early beginning of climate negotiation, and also Pak Haryanto, Bu Julia, and the rest. So I would like to, as requested by the organizers of this event, I would like to share my comments in regard to the report, and then gives you some ideas about the governance issue in the energy sectors, which I observe, as well as the input for your projects. So if we the report that has produced as a country studies try to address the climate governance issue. And when we talk about the climate governance, it's basically, to my understanding, is a mechanism that propose to implement our respective NDC. And therefore, the key of this, of the governance, is how the collaboration between ministries or agencies to deliver the emission reduction target, because NDC is about emission reduction target, right? So it should explain what is the role of each ministry involved in the NDC delivery, the structure of collaboration, the coordination mechanism, what is the MNV mechanism, and the feedback to overall general plan, of course, as well as the interoperability of various plans, which I think in this report, you already mentioned about the role of each ministry, but I see that the detailed role of each ministry has not yet described properly, and I think that could be improved in the second report next year. And also because you mentioned a number of plans, in particular in the energy sectors, but how this plan actually interact each other, how the plan is operate and strengthen each other, or the relation between this plan has not yet mentioned. For instance, we mentioned about RUEN, Rencana Umum Energi Nasional, National Energy Plan. And at the same time, for the electricity sector, we have RUKN, the National Electricity Plan, as well as the PLN 10-year business plan, RUPTL, that revised every year. How these plans interact each other, and since we have to also look at the implementation of the NDC, then how we can measure and evaluate the progress of the NDC action. So we also know that although right now the largest chunk of the emission from Indonesia come from land use sector, but also the model inform us that in the near future the emission from energy sector also will increase. And when we talk about the energy sector is not just the electricity sectors. So far, the main contribution of the emission from the energy sector is the power sector, but also the rising consumption of fuel on the transport sector also contribute, I think, around 40-45% of the total emission from the energy sectors. So while this report focusing on the electricity, I can say, I think it's a miss to address the importance of transport sector when it comes to the emission reduction. And that's also lead to this in terms of pictures on the respective stakeholders in the energy sector. So it's too much focused on the supply side, who generate the electricity, the power, but not really address the issue in the supply side, which is the energy use. In the demand side, the energy users, which transport industries, commercials, and public. Yeah, and I think it's very important because when we look at the stakeholders, then I understand that Ministry of Energy, although they plan for the total the entire energy sector, but have limited mandate or a role to play in other sectors. For instance, Ministry of Energy doesn't have a very little say in terms of energy efficiency in transport sectors, or even energy efficiency in the building sectors in terms of setting standard and the implementation, because other ministries are responsible for that. So I think by having a complete picture of a supply and demand side, you can address, you can have better stakeholders identifications. Also in the report, you mentioned about the bridging fuel, and I think that's come from a number of interview. The question is, when we look at the NDC from energy transition perspective, the question is, does it really necessary to have bridging fuel? Because at the end, we have to avoid fossil fuel infrastructure, fossil fuel lock-in that could lead to the carbon lock-in. So I think how we going to use NDC as a stepping stone for energy transition also should be analyzed, and I think that also could be done in the second year of the report. I don't think that we have to really look at the bridging fuel, because then it may not be needed. Yeah, but again, it should be based on a scientific research and analysis. The other important questions then, whether in Indonesia NDC is sufficient to meet Paris Agreement, because that actually the discussion in the international level, whether the current NDCs compatible with the Paris Agreement target. And we know that the Paris Agreement target has want to reach below 2 degrees and 1.5, as well as net zero emission in the middle of century. A number of studies indicated that Indonesia NDC is not compatible with the Paris Agreement. And this is one of the review undertook by Climate Action Tracker that suggested that the Indonesia NDC is highly insufficient, and instead of leading to 2 degrees, Indonesia NDC is lead to 3 to 4 degrees. The question is, if we are being challenged by international community to raise our ambition, so reflect Paris Agreement target, who make decision? Because we know, I think, and also in the report, it mentioned that putting up the target is actually a tug of war between ministries. And even one of the interviewee, I think, also mentioned, and it is also stated that they don't really know how the target is actually made, and whether it based on the capability of the sector to reduce the emission. I think from reading the report that it's like kind of that the sector itself not really sure whether they can meet their own target. But again, the challenge is bigger because we need to raise the ambitions. Well, the other thing is important when we would like to deliver the target is, yes, hello? Is the policy integration, because we have a number of policy in the energy sectors. The question is, because all the policy, it has the target. The question is whether we are able to execute that all the plan and meet the target. For instance, the 29% target of NDC is based to the National Energy Plan target to meet 23% of renewable energy by 2025. So in reality, it's not easy to meet that target, as Pak Haryanto also mentioned, and there should be a lot of acceleration, and it means that if we cannot meet that target on time, then the whole NDC target also will not met. So and also the impact of COVID to the energy demand and supply, and the question is, will it be temporarily, or it will really trigger the structural change in the energy system, similar to the IEA report that mentioned actually that coal demand already peaked in 2018, and it lead to the like structural decline in the near future. So that's the same question for Indonesia, and I think it requires in-depth study to understand how this impact of the COVID-19 to the energy sectors. And also we look at the PLN, because PLN play very, very important role in deliver the NDC, because most of the renewable energy targets should be carried out by PLN by changing its or refine its plan by increasing more renewable energy into the power system. And also in last year, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry issued a new regulation on the emission standard for stationary sources, in this case power plant, and they are improving standard for old power coal-fired power plant, and a stronger standard for the new one. However, the implementations of this regulation is not so clear at this moment. Just last month, I think, the PLN CEO in front of Parliament stated that implementing this standard will cause increasing in terms of electricity subsidy up to 10.7 trillion rupiah, or about $800 million, and could increase the rise the price of electricity around 104 rupiah per kilowatt hour. And that, I think, the message that any effort to improve the the performance, the environmental performance or coal-fired power plant will lead to the increasing cost of the electricity. So I think that's another question, because what will regulate by this standard is actually the SOX and NOx. Yeah. Also, the policy coherent with all the policies that currently in play, how it's actually deliver the emission reduction. So that's another issues that we have to look at. And as the question,
mohon maaf, bisa dipercepat ya.
Ya, ini sudah mau selesai, Pak. So when we would like to reach net zero emission, if we look at the long-term national energy plan right now, it shows that we are far from that particular target. And even with the current policy, even by 2050, 70% of our energy still come from fossil fuel, and therefore the question whether we can reach net zero emission is doubted. From IESR own study, when we look at the energy transition scenario to meet with the Paris Agreement, there is no way we are able to meet that only if we increase renewable energy. In our report, and I think we just launched it 2 weeks ago, we found out to consistently meet with the Paris Agreement target, that renewable energy should reach, if we would like also to meet with like a temporary, like the National Energy Plan target, renewable energy capacity should be at 24 gigawatt by 2025. It means like adding another 14 gigawatt or around 3 to 4 gigawatt annually has to be built from now until 2025. And by 2050, our renewable energy capacity should reach around 410 gigawatt. So that very a big number. And so the question is whether we will be able to deliver as it is, as what we hope that the NDC could deliver. So I think this could be the subject of the second year study, to look at how more ambitious mitigation target aligned with energy transition scenario could help Indonesia meet the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Baby. I think you have made several very good and valid point in relation to providing the input to the second year, as well as respond to our year one. Like you just mentioned, in terms of the stakeholder, we saw only incomplete picture, and then questioning about the bridging fuel. This is very good to discuss further. So hopefully later we can have a special meeting with you, because in the year one we were not able to make it. Okay, thanks, Pak Feby. Now is in my laptop is 13 to 4. I understand that Professor Harald Winkler will have to leave by 4. Probably before we listen to written comment of Professor Haryadi, I just would like to ask Prof. Harald to respond. I think you have 3, two questions from Pak Rempu, and then also from I lost the question. And okay, but probably you already read the question, Prof. Harald. Please.
Yes, Prof. Joko, thank you very much. I have been reading the questions coming into the question and I've answered some of them briefly, but so the one question was about affordable access, and my view is that that's definitely an essential right, you know, socioeconomic third generation right if you want, but rights always have to be balanced against other rights, and I raise the right to a healthy environment, and that's in the South African Constitution. So I think, yes, as a matter of equity, the issue becomes who pays, and I would distinguish between an old distinction made by Anil Agarwal and Suneeta Narain many years ago between survival and luxury emissions. So I don't think, as a matter of equity, as a normative statement, the poor should be expected to pay for survival emissions to meet really basic needs, whereas you know, we could have a higher cost for luxury emissions to fly around the world like we all do to climate meetings when it's not COVID. So we're also part of the problem. And then there was another question. Sorry, I'm just yes, about the just transition and mitigation and adaptation. No, the just transition transaction was focused on mitigation. That was the case study we've completed. We are now busy in the SNAP-FI consortium focusing also on funding of adaptation, but that is for later. And then the last one that I see is the financing from the guilty people. It finds good to have law as a base to apply such sanction. Yes, that's an excellent point, and there's an increasing activity around climate litigation. The one, I'm not a lawyer, but the Ogenda case in the Netherlands and other cases that at this stage are starting to be brought by civil society organizations are important. So thank you very much, and it's been fascinating to listen. I'm sorry that I will have to leave in 10 minutes for another call, but thank you so much for the invitation and for being with you. Back to you, Prof. Joko.
Thanks. So Dimas, please, you can, on behalf of Professor Haryadi. So you are become professor now.
Thank you, Pak Joko, for the time. So I'm here filling in for Professor Haryadi Kartodiarjo, and I will present his thoughts on our country study year 1. All right. So the first one, in the study, several main challenges in climate finance and climate governance arrangement in Indonesia for the energy sectors have been described, including in the form of a coal dilemma, along with the problem of power generation through monopoly by either state-owned enterprises, in this case PT or independent power producers, and then a legal framework that has not yet been ready to support investment towards renewable energy-based power plants, the still complicated licensing process, or the development of renewable energy-based power plants in remote areas. Meanwhile, it is known that the renewable energy needs a strong legal framework to attract investment. Second of all, the stakeholder analysis has shown that the climate management governance in the energy sectors faces a complexity which is 3 intersecting pillars, namely climate governance, energy governance, and climate finance. Realizing climate governance in the energy sector requires economic and political transformation in order to meet the supply of energy to meet national needs, achieve climate change, and use optimal domestic resources, both renewable energy and intermediate fuels. In this case, it would be natural gas and green technology using coal. As an economic political transformation, what is needed by the wider community is transparency and government accountability, both for the scientific work of determining emission reduction reports and establishing policies towards renewable energy nationally, including how the laws contained in the job creation law, omnibus bill, can become the main support of this energy transformation. Efforts towards good governance in the energy sector needs to be emphasized in the report, including avoiding changes and canceling regulations, implementing basic policies that enable the energy sector, such as pricing policies, waste utilization, and others. And for the recommendation for country study year 2, the first one would be the analysis of technical, economic, and political causes should be deepened on particularly on why there are still transparency and accountability problems, and why there is still a large gap between the Indonesian government's pledge to NDC, national policies, and renewable energy programs. This deepening should also at the same time pay attention to the elaboration of job creation law that can support whether it is related to energy, particularly in the support of the resolution of the various obstacles that are currently occurring, and who is pro and or contra in resolving the core dilemma problem. In addition, it may be very important if in the second year of this study, the information is obtained about the position of House of Representatives and its supports for the National Renewable Energy Program. That's it. That's the input and the comments from the Professor Hadi. Thank you. Over to you, Pak Joko.
Thank you, Dimas. Yeah, I show Professor Haryadi especially mentioned about the omnibus law on job creation. So Professor Harad, this is a quite new law, just last week being approved by Parliament. So of course it will have quite significant impact to the future NDC implementation, in my opinion. Okay, I don't know, before I give the chance to Ibu Yulia, because Ibu Yulia, I think, make respond to several points. Before Professor Harald Winkler leave, usually we have a photo session. We'll take. So after that, we can still continue like 10 minutes after 4. So yeah. Dimas will organize the photo session.
All right, so if please other distinguished speakers could turn on the camera, please. I would try to like capture. So yeah, all right.
Professor Harald. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So 1, 2, 3, and once more 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you. Over to you, Pak Joko.
Later at 4, if you want to leave, just please do so, Professor Harad. Again, on behalf of CCC and also the consortium, I would like to thank very much, and of course looking forward for further exchange. Thank you. So I also show several comment from Professor Harald to Pak Feby. I don't know, Pak Feby, you want to respond first, and then I give to Ibu Yulia.
Yeah, Professor Joko, I think I understand Harad concern, and I think that's the in terms of the methodology used by Climate Action Tracker in divine fair share, and because that's the I think the debate among the climate equity in the climate equities. There's a lot of debate about how we can measure fair share. Also the reason why I use this to show that there is a different interpretation in terms of what is enough or what would be sufficient for country to deliver the emission reduction target in order to meet the NDC. But the point I would like to raise that in the context of this project is that because we are not really sure in Indonesia who make that decision, and we know that our NDC is part of the ratification of Paris Agreement, and that's mean under the law, and that law is this decision made by the parliament together with the government. So the question is, if we would like to increase our ambition, should we do that through the law? That's the question, and I think we know, unless in the case of the case of omnibus law, which is can be discussed in the parliament for quite fast. I think less than 6 months. Won't happen with the other laws, I think, and I think that as now as the Indonesian is seen as one of the larger emitters in terms of from the energy sectors, there is a lot of pressure for Indonesia also to increase that the mitigation target, which I think, as Julia mentioned, that the Ministry of Environment right now is not keen to increase that target. So, so that's actually the issues with Indonesia. Who make the decision?
Okay, thank you, Pak Fendi. Ibu Yulia.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, Pak Joko, I'm so sorry. I was in the. What was it again? I'm so sorry.
No, probably you could just say what you are writing in the.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Well, I wrote a little bit different issues here. Okay, maybe first I want to mention what I first wrote about the adaptation element in the NDC. So because I think Ibu Niken already addressed these issues, whether there will be then kind of innovation for the adaptation element in NDC, right? So as you may aware that the element on of adaptation in NDC also cover the energy security, and there is also now in the NDC roadmap on adaptation, they elaborate how to achieve that security on energy. So I think that's the linkage between the adaptation element and mitigation. So we call it kind of co-benefit, and maybe that entry point will we can use for the for answering the issues on the, I think, the last question on Ibu Niken, ya Pak ya. And the other thing is regarding the ambitious target. So I just want to remind that in the PA as well as in the conventions itself, so the PA mandated the ambitious target so that the NDC is not kind of in terms of backslide on the target, and as well as the ambitious, the high ambitious as possible that the country can can achieve. So I just want to remind colleagues that the ambitious target is not only in the mitigation element, but also in the adaptation as well as in the means of implementation itself. Like mandated by the conventions, I think Professor Harald, oh, I think he's leaving. I think Professor Harald experienced during the negotiation process that it is not easy to have the willingness from the developed country parties to fulfill their pledges in terms of means of implementation. So nowadays, in the negotiation itself, the burden, the negotiation is like the shifting the burden from the developed country parties to developing country parties. So that's maybe we have to bearing it in mind. So we, as we know that NDC, the nationally determined contribution, is like we committed to do some things in our power, considering as well the priority of the development in the national level. So maybe that point should also be put into our minds. Is not only the number itself, but also the supporting elements of the implementation should be then more ambitious than we receive now. So that's maybe that point. Maybe Pak Joko, I would like to raise. Sorry if just I just cut off from the previous connection. So thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Yulia. I would like to invite Pak Haryanto, if you want to just provide
sorry, I mute.
Back to Pak Febi or Professor Harad, even is not here now, or Ibu Yulia. And after this, I give the opportunity to Ibu Niken.
Thank you, Pak Joko. Just short comment, Pak Joko. If we are talking about the study, that the main in the study mentioned that the main actor in climate change are the Ministry of the Environment and also Bappenas. And MEMR continues to coordinate with Ministry of Environment and Forestry in Bappenas in achieving target linked to target for national energy fulfillment. I think. Often in terms of energy, we always link renewable energy with the achievement of the Paris Agreement. In the meantime, we are working hard to achieve the national target, which will be in line with the achievement of this emission reduction. So, in terms of the discussion between Pak Fabi and Professor Hal, that who will take a decision if you want to include or increase the target, then I think Ministry of Environment and also governance know for this Paris Agreement, and then we will support with proof, with the reality, what we could achieve with this target, especially for the energy sector. Thank you, Pak Professor.
Ya, makasih Pak Haryanto. Ibu Niken.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the inputs from Ibu Emma and Ibu Yulia, Pak Haryanto, Pak Fabi, and also Professor Haryadi in writings. First, I would like to respond to what Ibu Yulia said about the question regarding adaptation. Thank you very much for your response. And actually, we have also ongoing discussion in our team regarding the adaptation aspect. And I think we also had a fruitful discussion 2 weeks ago in terms of webinar of adaptation. And yeah, we thank you for the response regarding that. And for the inputs regarding, especially in energy sector, from Pak Haryanto and Pak Fabi in general, we thank you, and we also realize that for example, the stakeholder analysis, yes, we do agree that uh, the informants interviewed still heavily on the supply side rather than the demand side. And also thank you, Pak Haryanto, for also enlightening several information on the progress of and achieving NDC target or emission reduction in the energy sector. We realize we probably have to obtain more information from other sector, especially the transportation sector and also the building or housing sector. And then regarding the next question for the further study or for the year 2 study, I catch there are two points obtained here regarding the COVID-19 and the funding, whether it will affect the funding for achieving NDC target in various sector or not. And also the comments from Professor Haryadi regarding the hottest issue right now, the job creation law, which might probably provide an ease access for the private sector in investing in renewable energy or power plant. So yeah, we thank you for the inputs and looking forward for our next contact in the future. Thank you very much, Pak Joko.
Thank you, Ibu Niken, who already tried to synthesize and capture all the comment as well as input for the second year. I think now already 10 past 4. In my opinion, we already get all we expected from this current webinar. So I would like to thanks again all the speakers as well as all the participants. Terima kasih, selamat sore semua pembicara, narasumber, dan juga peserta ya. Saya mohon maaf tidak bisa menyapa satu persatu peserta, mungkin banyak yang saya kenal, tapi tidak bisa saya sapa dalam keadaan sekarang. Saya hanya menyampaikan terima kasih sebanyak-banyaknya, apresiasi setinggi-tingginya. Waktu saya kembalikan ke Mas Dimas.
All right, Pak Joko, before closing this webinar, I would like to remind all participants to fill out the attendance form whose link is shared in the chat box. So, all right, so that was the third climate policy and finance talk hosted by the Climate Change Center of Institut Teknologi Bandung. We thank for the participation from all panelists, discussants, and participants, and we certainly hope that you enjoyed the discussion. For the presentation slides and certificates, we will email it to you in 1 week. So thank you for your participation and see you in the next Climate Policy and Finance talk. Good afternoon.
Terima kasih.
Thank you.
Pak Haryanto, Bu Yulia.
Terima kasih, Profesor Joko.
Ya.